you are.
There you are.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, by the way. Appreciate it.
Listen, come on.
How was your day so far?
Yeah, fantastic. I just finished up an awesome mug of Kenyan and looking forward to the afternoon. It's a gorgeous day here in Rossland.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm here in Calgary, Alberta. Have you been out here?
Yeah, actually, we lived in Calgary
Oh,
before
yes.
we moved out to Rossland 12 years ago.
Nice.
Yeah.
Ever miss the West?
Uh, Listen, one of the reasons that we moved out here is it would have been in November. We were just having a brutal cold snap in Calgary. And I thought to myself, what the heck is going on? So I hopped on the interwebs, and my Google search pattern was coldest city in the world today. And Calgary was number two, only beaten out by a tiny bit by a city in Siberia. And I thought to myself, come on,
Time to go.
it's got to change.
No, that's amazing. And it's funny that you're drinking Kenyan coffee today. I'm from Tanzania originally.
Oh, nice,
Yes.
nice. Whereabouts?
Dar es Salaam?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Dar, yeah. Next to, closer to Arusha. Yeah.
Ah, cool. I don't get too many Tanzanian coffees. I think it's a much bigger scene in Kenya, of course, but I have drank Tanzanian, and um, yeah, I love the coffees from that region of the world. They're beautiful.
Yeah. Why is coffee such a big thing for you?
That's a great question. I owned a second cup in Calgary, believe it or not, for a
No.
couple of years, downtown on Fifth. But that's an aside. Before I owned the second cup, of course, there was Army coffee, and possibly the most diabolical beverage known to man. A terrible mug of brown, just a horrible drink, and drinking that for the first few weeks in my the onset of my military career, I was like, coffee's not for me. So I never touched coffee for a long time. Like throughout most of my military career, I didn't drink coffee. And then when I got out, one of my riding buddies said, you know what you need? You need to ride on coffee. I was like, I hate coffee, bro. And he said, no, let me introduce you to coffee. And you know what he did? He threw me onto the crack cocaine coffee. He was onto the caramel macchiatos and the whole thing. And I was like, this isn't so bad. And through a process of getting away from the candy cane coffees and moving more towards a purist approach, trying to understand the nuance of coffee, um, you know, I guess I started roasting coffee, and that was over 15 years ago. And so now I purchase for over 2 years now. I sole source out of a place in Calgary. A guy called Jeff runs Apex Coffee Imports.
Oh, yes.
I think they are the best coffee importers in Canada. And I say that because two reasons. One, they bring in amazingly high scoring green beans. And the second thing is they're super passionate about supporting the coffee producer at source. And so I've had the opportunity to go down to estates and pick coffee greens myself. And I understand, at least as a casual observer, how difficult that job is. And so I have a decent appreciation for what it takes to bring this green bean into North America. And then it's my job to roast it well enough to reflect what I think the farmer was trying to accomplish that year. And so I started out with horribly bad coffee and then went on to arguably worse coffee with the caramel macchiatos, and now I'm into super freak nerdy boy trying to get my coffee mad scientist on, and I love it.
Oh, and there's an art to it, isn't there?
There is an art.
Hmm.
And listen, you're fortunate living in Calgary. There's some good coffee shops in Calgary, and there's some that I would say are good representations of best in class in Canada. certainly in the top 10 anyway. You could go to a couple of places and have yourself a cup of coffee that would change a world. If you could sit down with it contemplatively and really dial into what is actually occurring at that moment. But you know, that's life, right? The life is a game of levels, and you only know what you know, and you'll never get any further than that unless you go exploring.
Sure. And oftentimes we just drink the coffee and don't think about anything. Just, it's coffee. Yeah.
Correct. Well, that is the difference between consuming life and engaging in life.
Mm. Were you always someone that engaged in life, or was it the opposite at one point?
Yeah, you know, that's an awesome question. I don't think anyone has ever made that connection or been rapidly thoughtful enough to pose that question. I think I've always had a natural curiosity. I just didn't know how to express it or how to explore it. So, the military, of course, taught me a lot of things, but probably I learned more about the magic of adventuring once I left the military. The military gave me a really strong foundation to be able to, you know, jump out of a plane in just my underwear and no boots, and land in a country that I know nothing about and own it. And so that has always allowed me since that point to be able to adventure in any way I wanted to. But entering into the act of adventuring, you then have to learn how you best adventure, or how you best explore, or how you best learn for yourself, not just in a way of, I would suggest, maximizing the velocity or optimizing the journey forward. I think adventuring for me is about finding the right balance between a little bit of chaos and a little bit of the unknown and a little bit of adversity and uncomfortable. I'm not sure where this is going, and chasing what I know is going to be successful, executing against it in a rational and logical manner, and etc. So kind of that yin and yang of sort of living in the whirlwind of the unknown while still feeling comfortable and executing against the process. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes.
Mm.
What was your childhood like, Sean? Did you
Mm.
know that you would go into the military? Did you know this is who you were?
That's a great question. And I have been asked that question before. And my simple answer would be this. Um, my mom tells me that at the age of 5,
Yeah.
I was going to be in the military. Because that's what I was telling her.
Mm-hmm.
And I said it enough, I guess, that it became a thing for me. And it's not that I was hyper focused on that's all I'm going to be, that's all I want to be. But it was an idea that I felt inside of me, not an idea that I could formalize and poke and prod and say, oh, yeah, it's going to look like that. I wasn't sure. I just had this feeling. So that's kind of, for lack of a better term, an internal calling. I just didn't know how to execute against it. And of course, you know, that begins with basic training, I suppose.
Sure. So growing up, were you someone that had a lot of energy, or maybe ADHD or ADD, now looking back and saying, holy, I needed this channel to maybe in sports or something to get it out of you?
That's a good question as well. I'm not sure what I might have had back in the day when I was a kid growing up, in the sense of whether I had any mental health challenges
Right.
or whether there was any pre-existing, et cetera. I'm not sure. Because back then, you know, in the 60s and 70s,
There
it's
was.
that, you know, it wasn't the scene.
Mm.
You just did what you did, and sometimes people looked at you a little sideways, and sometimes they didn't. But there was nothing more to it than that. There was no formal diagnostics, if you will, and I was no different than any of my peers, any other kids at the time. And But this is an interesting comparison, I will say. I was no different than the kids of my time, but I was different than the kids of today, as we all were. And here's why. Because for me, it wouldn't be unusual. Sometimes I did skip school, not much, but I did. So that also wasn't unusual back in the day. But what I would skip school for is I would grab my 22 caliber rifle and I would just go out either by myself or with a buddy, and we'd hunt rabbits, and we'd hunt rabbits all day long. And it didn't matter if it was summer or winter. If it was winter, we'd take an apple and a can of baked beans and some matches, and that was our lunch. And we just head out, minus 20, minus 30 in the snow by ourselves, 14, 15 years old, and just spend the whole day out there doing our thing. And so we'd come home at night and then do it again the next day. And if I wasn't hunting, then I was fishing out in the middle of nowhere. And I lived in the Rockies in Grand Cache, and lots of grizzly, lots of bear, coyote, wolf, wolverine. It wasn't a spot that perhaps today's generations of kids would just simply walk out their front door with a fishing rod and not return for 12 hours. But that's just the way it was back in the day. So to your question, did I exhibit any unusual tendencies in the way of being hyperactive out in the woods? No different than any of my other peers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, kids are kids, right? We were
Kids are
boys
kids.
once.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, interestingly enough, back then, no one knew what a boy was or what a man was because those conversations weren't happening.
Mm.
And so you kind of came up how you came up. And so, for me, I loved it. I love soccer. When I was born in England, that's what I started playing as a sport. And when we moved to Canada when I was 10, I continued playing indoor and outdoor soccer. And if I wasn't playing soccer, I was hunting or fishing. And that just was normal to me. And I'm not saying that all of my friends did that, but quite a few of them did. And so, we were always pretty much outdoors being active.
It's interesting though, as time goes on and life goes on, the inner child of you comes out in different ways, doesn't it, as an
I think
adult?
so. I think so.
And I think if you do tap into it, it is a beautiful thing. So I used to paint a lot when I was younger, and
Mm,
doing that again through the pandemic and all that just brought some joy that I was missing, as
mm.
we grow older and have to grow up.
Yeah, the one of the things that I kind of re-established this conceptual, deep and thoughtful contemplation on the subject that you just mentioned is the idea of play. And so, when I was coming up through the military, it's not, I wasn't focused on play. It was all business all the time. And, through my other careers, of course, I was a pretty serious guy. I took things seriously. I executed against things to the best of my ability. It wasn't all playtime. But about almost precisely 7 years ago, I started Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Yeah.
And I started that on my 52nd, just before my 52nd birthday. And I turned 59 this month, actually. And so prior to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, I'd also done, it was 32 years of martial arts, all a whole pile of different styles from just before I joined the military, all through the military, and then proceeding after the military. But at 52, I started BJJ. Now, all of those other martial arts, the styles that I did were all very hard styles. But BJJ it can be as hard as you want or as easy as you want. And so what it did teach me to do was be more playful in martial arts. And so, yeah, it's grappling and it can be hard.
Mhm.
And there's a side of BJJ that is not playful if you don't want to play. But if you want to play, then it can kind of take you back to when you were a younger boy, in my opinion. And where I learned this the most was I took my two sons onto the mats with me. So my oldest son was 12, my youngest son was 11 when they started on the mats with me. And, my oldest has been on the mats with me ever since. In fact, he's my main rolling partner. Nearly every single night that I'm on the mats, I'm rolling with my oldest son, Evan. My youngest son, he was on the mats with me for a few years, but then he switched over to biathlon. So he was doing a lot of Nordic skiing and shooting to compete provincially. So my oldest son again was into BJJ with me, and man, what it taught me was how to embrace my inner child again. Because now I was rolling with a 12-year-old, my son, and I had to find a way to joyfully move in a martial art. And man, it was so awesome for me. It actually took me back to being a young boy again, believe it or not.
I did martial arts for 16 years. Hapkido?
Mm. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, Korean martial arts from the age of 4. So I definitely do know what you mean by that. Actually, tomorrow, Wednesday, will be my first time going to a jiu-jitsu class due to watching you.
Oh, that's
So
amazing.
thank you for that.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
I'd love to say it's my pleasure, but really all I'm doing is passing on the inspiration from others that inspired me, you know?
sure. I mean, it's been, oh gosh, over 10 years since I've, yeah, practiced any martial art. But it'll be nice to go back and, well, jiu-jitsu is such a different art, isn't it?
Totally different art. Sorry, I don't want to interject, but my next door neighbor just across the street, his name is Doug. And a few years ago, he said, "Do you enjoy Brazilian Jiu Jitsu?" And I said, "Yeah, bro, I love it." And he said, "I used to do Hapkido." I was like, "Oh, yeah." And he said, "I've been thinking of coming to the mats." I said, "You should do it." And he said, "How do you think I'll do?" I said, "I don't know. Let's see." And it all depends on how you show up, right? I mean, if you show up thinking that you're going to take care of business, it's probably not going to go well. But if you show up with he didn't show up like he was going to take care of business, believe me. But if you show up with sort of that growth mindset or that beginner mindset or that student mindset, and you'll really have to reinforce this idea of relax, bro. Just
Interesting.
relax tonight and just see how this plays out and
Mhm.
do your best, but don't try to work too hard. Or you might not love it, because if you put in, if you want to go to war, you'll only go to war once. And so your first session of BJJ is not the session to go to war. That's the session to show up on the sidelines and just do what you're told, and with a smile. You know what I mean?
Start small, step by step. Yeah.
Step by step, and not only step by step physically, but step by step mentally and emotionally. And by that I mean, like, you could ruin the love of martial arts in that first session simply by not allowing yourself the latitude to be able to say, it's a long game, man. It's the long game,
Yeah.
bro. Tonight isn't even a blip on the radar. Just enjoy and engage and smile and love on it and get to know the people around you, instead of trying to focus on all the details of an armbar. Just enjoy the moment.
All the grappling, yeah, on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing a lot of law enforcement and many people, vets, individuals in the military currently that are serving, that are interested in BJJ. Why has it become such a focal point of an art?
That's a good question. I think so. When I was in the military, BJJ wasn't a thing. And it was just starting to become a thing, but very, very, very much on the lowdown. So the martial arts that we were doing at the time, and I use the term martial arts loosely, it was a combination of many martial arts. And in fact, at the time, I was responsible to teach some of those martial arts as an unarmed combat instructor. And so it was more of a military focus, improvised weapons and edged weapons and things like this, along with more, I would say, brutal combatives. But that said, looking back through the lens of many years of martial arts since then, some of those things, though brutal, would have been less effective than things that are now more well known and would be more effective but less brutal. And so I think when I first started martial arts, BJJ wasn't a thing. It came onto the scene when guys like, Joe Rogan and Jocko Willink and such, some really big personalities started talking about the benefits of BJJ and how effective it is. And of course, Jocko Willink brings a lot of weight to the conversation. I think he's a gold mine of information, but really he's so legitimate that when he says something like, you should think about doing BJJ, you should sit back and think, I need to think about doing BJJ. And so between just those two characters alone, they really kind of spread this message of look into it. And so why is it such a prominent conversation for law enforcement, first responders, and military? I would suggest it's because it's highly effective and highly efficient, and it's not reliant on weight or strength or technical prowess or speed or multiple years of understanding. You can take someone onto the BJJ mats for a month, and within a month of work, they can control better than 90% of the population. And the 90% of the population that's being controlled by that person who's got a month of mat time won't be able to understand why or how they're being controlled, because again, it's what you know and what you don't know, and the average citizen simply doesn't know how easy it is to control a person.
Do you think in some of the real life scenarios that you have dealt with, BJJ would have been an advantage for you working on the ground?
For sure. So I will say this, that oh no, I won't say this. I will allude to the fact that I may have had a few fights. And so back in the day, I try not to do that now. And taking out the glib comment and being real for a moment, there's nothing great about fighting on the street or fighting in a bar or fighting anywhere for that matter, unless you're fighting in a professional setting or an amateur setting in a ring where it's controlled violence. Now, if you find yourself in a fight, of course, I think how I used to manage it when I first started out and how I managed it many years later are radically different, but the same outcome. The outcome is the threat is neutralized, but at the start of my fighting, we'll call it career, what you were left as an end result is you might be kind of banged up yourself, but certainly that other person is definitely banged up and harmed in a way that is not appropriate, we'll say, in context of how you can control the situation with BJJ. So if in those early circumstances where I may or may not have been fighting, if I could have had the level of BJJ knowledge that I have now, then that person wouldn't be hurt. I wouldn't be hurt. It would have been controlled in a manner that is easy for anyone around me as bystanders to see that I was applying a safe control sequence of events to not harm the other individual while I'm informing them, please stop resisting. I don't want to hurt you. Let's just stop this right now, etc. And so a much more, we'll call it humane, for a lack of better term, way to manage a potentially violent confrontation that simply turns into a controlled situation, waiting for either the police to show up or for you to disengage when it's appropriately safe.
What amazes me is that you and I can have these conversations, yet the other day I was looking at some stats, and I think there's only about 30,000 World War II veterans left. After Mr. John Babcock from World War I, there's no one else now here in Canada. those individuals didn't have social media, didn't have these channels
Mm.
to share stories and learn and people that are curious, what is it like to be a warrior, a soldier? What kind of mindset? What made you say this is that I'm okay to go get out there and share my story, share my thoughts, without, a lot of people hold it in. They don't want to talk about certain things.
Yeah, that is the question of the day for me anyway. I don't know if it's a question of the day for anyone else, that's for sure. But it's something that I've posed to myself nearly every day since I started doing this. And I haven't been doing it that long. And listen, if you have probably been on my social media page now long enough. If you've been on it for anything over a week, you'll know how not great I am at social media. But I try to do my best. I try to improve. But today versus a year ago,
Mhm.
I think it's a bit of a difference, enough of a difference that I'm happy enough with the improvement that I've made. But a year ago, oh my goodness, it was just brutal. I could barely stare into the eye of Sauron. That's what I used to call it. I kind of started this whole venture out of just a bunch of buddies, a bunch of
Interesting.
back in the
Yeah.
day friends who were encouraging me to step up and do my part, or they were poking me in the chest and say, "Bro, you got to get out there.
Hmm.
You got to, there's things that you could talk about." And I just kept saying, "I got nothing to say. I'm not the right guy. I don't want to do this." I did everything I could to reject this tiny little role that I'm playing right now. I had wanted nothing to do with it, but enough good guys that I respect put enough pressure on me. I mean, they called me names, rude names. and so and so I thought about it because enough guys, I have so much respect for some of these guys that I started thinking, okay, maybe I will. But that wasn't enough for me to start it. It was just enough to nudge me in the direction of thinking about, well, why would I even do this? And what it was I started looking at the statistics of suicide, the statistics of PTSD, the statistics of mental health, the issues that most people are facing. I didn't understand how common or how great the commonality was, regardless of how unique a person's path is. I just simply wasn't aware. I hadn't gone outside of myself and really looked. Um, but once I started looking, it was hard to turn away from it. And so I kind of put the two things together, all of my buddies hassling me and the perhaps greater social responsibility to start talking because of these statistics, because of this reality.
Mhm.
And so along the way, it was a very humble start. Well, it's still a very humble thing that I'm doing right now. But how it started was this. I was out on a mountain bike ride and I took my smartphone in my back pocket. I bungee corded it to a tree up on a single track trail. And I looked at the tree and I said, all right, here we go. And that's kind of how it started. And for the first few weeks, I'd bungee cord my smartphone to a tree up on a trail in the middle of the snow or whatever. And I'd stare into the eye of Sauron. And man, I could hardly, like, I just wanted to stare at my feet and talk because it's so
Oh
uncomfortable. It's
yeah.
so uncomfortable. And I'm still uncomfortable doing it. But I every day that I engage in this process, or every day that I not recommit, but I commit to the process,
Mhm.
the path gets clearer, my commitment gets stronger, my ability to engage in social media gets better. I take not faith, but trust in the process because I've just done these projects too many times to know that it will be successful. It just takes a few years of grinding to, get that 10-year project to a point where I feel comfortable with, okay, I've made a small dent. in the process. And yeah, okay, here we go.
I spoke with a few Canadian Olympians. They reached out to me and they had said, "You're having Shaun on. We've always thought here in Canada, why don't we have individuals like a Jocko of Canada or
Mhm.
David Goggins? And we see all these people in the States, but we don't have anybody talking here. So thank you for that."
Well, it is true. And listen, I am by no stretch of the imagination in the same conversation as those names, but you're right. There does need to be, or I think there should be a Canadian or some Canadians that are representing the great men and women here in Canada. And they exist. They're out there. Not me, of course, but I mean, there's people that are out there that are like amazing people. And I really want them to be discovered. I really would love for them to not step up, but become more present in this process. And I've said it before in videos, at least a couple of times. I'm just a fill-in. I'm like a band-aid. I'm just waiting for that next guy or girl to come along and high five me and say, yeah, pretty good job, but can you move along because now the professionals are here and we're here to take over. And I'm like, yes,
Yeah,
I'm out
yeah,
because they're going to crush it. Whereas I'm just trying to do my best, and hopefully my best is enough to inspire someone out there to then do their best. And I don't think it needs to be a game of I'm at this level and they're at this level or they're at this level, but they need to be. It's not that. It's just hopefully if someone out there can hear what I'm saying right now and understand that I I'm not good at this. I'm uncomfortable doing it. I'm just doing my best, and my best is enough to be helpful for enough people that it keeps me going.
right. And these are just steps, we got to open that conversation up.
For
And,
sure.
there's a greater goal, a greater mission, like you said, is, talking more about PTSD, mental health, and ending that stigma that exists, oftentimes suffer in silence when we don't. We all have stories. We all
For
have
sure.
ups and downs, and we can learn from each other.
For sure. And there was so this is now my fourth podcast that I've done. Listen, come on. I had no idea. In fact, I would have put money on the table that I will never do it. I couldn't have spelled podcast 10 years ago. So here I am doing my fourth podcast. But the reason I raised that subject on that meager number was the first podcast that I did. I thought, forget about it. I'll never do a podcast.
Right.
But some guys hassled me, and I said yes to a guy. His name is Chance Burrows, Tools for the Toolbox podcast, and I kind of laughed
Yeah.
before we hit record because it was a surreal moment for me. That it was a moment that I'd never anticipated. It was one that I thought,
Yeah.
well, this is Looney Tune, but I guess I don't know why I'm doing this, but I guess. But here I am continuing to do it, and not because I it's not because it's my life goal. I
Mhm.
do kind of enjoy them in a way. I'm enjoying this conversation. I do enjoy a good chat, but it's not. I don't do them
For
for.
notoriety.
Oh no, yeah, for
No.
sure, for
And we
sure.
can tell. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And but one thing that does encourage me to do them in a weird way is hopefully I can do a mediocre enough job that I can encourage someone else to come out and do a better job and
Right.
then relieve me of my job.
Interesting. Hurry up. Who's coming?
Come on. So Chance,
Yeah.
what he'd said, how I'd heard him say this in his podcast before I went on his podcast for the
Mm.
first time. He used to frame it as such that he used to look around like, who's going to do this? Who's going to who's going to talk about these things? And he said he got tired of waiting for a tier one guy to come down off of the hill, Dwyer Hill, or the hill, the team area, someone to come down, an operator, and sit down in front of a microphone and start talking about these things. Well, he wasn't talking about me. He was talking about hopefully someone else who's a tier one operator who has got his head squared away on his shoulders better than I do. But until that guy comes down and grabs a microphone and starts talking, well, I will. And what's different between me and Chance? Well, Chance took the initiative and started podcasting because a guy like me wasn't doing it. I'm no different than Chance. He's done a better job than I ever would. But the tiny little bit of hook that I guess I have is I guess I'm tier one. And with that comes a certain weight or a certain reputation or a certain ability or a certain been there, done that, or a certain something, je ne sais quoi, that people think, wow, tier one. And how I'm engaging in that is, wow, tier one, but I'm still a human. And guess what? I got PTSD. And guess what? I still suck at things. And guess what? And etc. And so just trying to put more of a human face on what Chance was trying to do when he first started his podcast is get someone who is supposed to be a hammer and demonstrate that we are also just as vulnerable as anyone else, I guess. At least that's what I'm trying to do.
Shaun, for the listeners that don't know much about all of this, what are the Pathfinders? How did you get involved? And what exactly is Tier 1 JTF2?
And within the military system, there is, we'll call it combat arms. And within combat arms, it is a organization that is responsible mostly for combat on the front lines of any different forms. And so within the combat arms, there are specialty lines that you can head off on a direction to become highly qualified in a particular style of combat or in a particular specialty genre. One of those would be Pathfinder. Pathfinder could be loosely considered as deep reconnaissance or someone who would be first in free fall parachute into an area deep behind and start gathering intelligence, start relaying that intelligence back, and then start understanding the general terrain to, we'll say, begin forming routes of approach and begin eyes on the objective and begin secondary taskings and et cetera, a lot of responsibilities, a lot of moving parts as you act within the role of a Pathfinder. Very, very small amount of Pathfinders in existence. In fact, when I went through my Pathfinder course, a very small amount of us graduated. And at that time, while I was on my course, I think there might have only been 20 Pathfinders in Canada. And so quite a rare bird, if you will. And just one example of a specialty trade within the combat arms, of which there are many specialty trades, and not just on the land, by the way, of course, within the Navy and with the Air Force, there are specialty trades.
Isn't there NTOG, right?
That's right. That's right. Correct. And so between land, air, and sea, each one has their own specialty trades. And the great thing about that is certainly within each one in the Army, as an example, it gives you something that you can not look forward to, but you can hold as I'd like to see if I can be that. I'd like to see if I can rise to the occasion. I'd like to think that I can do that. And so rather than having a homogenous flatline career where there's no, Mount Everest challenge that is available to you, well, in the military, you can have a few Mount Everests lined up in front of you if you want to walk up that mountain. And there'll always be another mountain after it if you want to start scaling those heights. And so what tends to happen is once you start scaling an Everest, then you start looking for your next Everest. And as you bang out the Everests, at some point in your career, you find that, well, I guess I've done a few things, and I'm now capable of a few things, and it tends to lead you in a path that has you now standing on mountaintops a lot, and looking out to the horizon and considering what your next next mountain will be. It develops a certain adventuring nature in you, a seeker
Yeah.
of challenges. And so, you know,
Well,
the
that's just
SAS
really
would
neat.
call it the pilgrim, or the seeker, or it's very true. I think you have to show up, and I do believe it has to be who you are. I don't think you'll ever be as good if you don't have it within you from birth, that adventuring spirit. But it can also be taught, or it can also be learned. You can learn to adventure, you can learn to seek. But I love the combination of it's who you are, and then you're taught how to do it well. That's where I've seen some of the most awesome results from some people.
Would that be curiosity though? Curiosity
For
versus
sure.
adventure are very similar.
For sure. I think we could call them the same thing, but if I was going to be pedantic, I would tease out the nuance of you can be curious, or you can have a creative imagination, or you can be a seeker in your mind, but then you have to put your foot on the ground and walk, and now you're adventuring. And so you can be curious all your life, but until you walk the walk, you'll never be an adventurer. And so you have to walk a mile to become a mile-long venturer. And so once you start venturing out with that curious mind and become a true adventurer, now you've got something interesting.
When do you know though, when we're talking about these mountain tops and Everest, and obviously an analogy, but how do you know, let's continue on, instead of saying, I'm comfortable where I'm at, and yeah, look, I've already done 2 or 3 mountaintops. Why do I need to go for the unknown? I'm good. I'm happy. What makes that person want more? What made you
Because
want more? Yeah.
I've seen more, because I know there's more, because I was introduced to more. And I think that for me, for you, for everyone, it's a different line in the sand that eventually gets crossed, and then it's just done. And there's no turning back. You can't unsee what you've seen. And so for you and me, it might be two different lines in the sand. And so perhaps it takes you 2 mountains. Perhaps it takes you 10 mountains. It doesn't matter how many it is. Eventually, there's no turning back. There's no unseeing what you've seen. And then you must pursue the adventure. And so how do you reach the amount of mountains that you need to reach to truly become an adventurer? And what if you're not a natural, or you don't have the natural inclination to be an adventurer? Well, that's not uncommon. I mean, not everyone pursues tier one. Not everyone pursues the military. Not everyone pursues a life of adversity or chaos or change. Some people just like stable and not exciting and not a lot of change, and that's okay. How did those people, we'll say as an example, using it as probably the hardest challenge to crack, how do people who don't want to chase adventure or don't want to explore life, how to get them involved in climbing their first mountain? Most often, they're not going to do it by themselves, because if they could, they would have already. And so that leaves them with needing support, needing inspiration. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is inspire people to get out there and start walking up their first molehill, and their first tiny little hill, and then their first medium-sized hill, and then their first small mountain, and then their first big mountain. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what guys and girls that I know are trying to get others to do.
Right.
And if I'm not doing it, and if they're not doing it, Then who is? Well, people that I don't know. And that's called teams, hobbies, sports, community gatherings.
Hmm.
Anything that will have you stand next to another human being where you can look at them and think, I've never heard anything like that
Right.
before. What's this guy talking about? Climb a freaking mountain? What? Who is this dude? So if I can't do it standing next to someone, then I'll try to do it in this medium. And if I
Right.
can't do it in this medium, then it's your responsibility, or it's whoever's responsibility that's listening to this right now, who has it within them to be able to look at someone and say, bro, join me on a walk, join me on a run. Do you own a mountain bike? Let's go for a ride.
Mhm.
What? BJJ? You've never heard of it? Come on out tonight. Let me show you a few things. It's our job. If not for anyone else doing it, it's got to be us.
I mean, just watching you for 1 week made me say, all right, tomorrow I'm going for BJJ for the first time ever. So,
That's awesome, man. I love it. And you know, I'd love to, like, yes, Shaun. But the truth of it is, I'm hoping that you do it
yeah.
2 weeks from now. Your excitement will, wherever you are, sitting down in a coffee shop or whatever the case is, your opportunity to have that conversation to inspire someone. You can do it in 30 seconds.
Mhm.
You can change someone's life in a coffee lineup,
Yeah.
or in a podcast.
Or in a podcast. Shaun, what is tier one? You brought it up a few times. And for the listeners, what exactly is that?
Well, generally speaking, as I understand it, and this, it's not a fixed definition, but generally it is this. Tier one is the highest level of special operations within a particular country. It's my understanding that right now, I believe there are 3 tier one units in the world. It is the British SAS, it is Delta Force in the United States, and it is JTF2 in Canada. Now, some would say that SEAL Team 6 would also be part of that tier one, and then some would say, and et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of add-ons that you could put in there, but generally speaking, the loose definition that's tossed around is British, American, and Canadian within those 3 organizations. And so those organizations are responsible primarily for extremely surgical, perhaps counterterrorism or direct action, or things that are specialist in nature that require extremely high level of training and require a certain kind of individual that brings the resources and abilities and wherewithal to be able to manage national strategic
Mm.
targets. That's a very nebulous definition without
Yes.
getting into specifics, but it would be extremely difficult to paint a full picture of what tier one does.
Mhm. And how many members would be, or in a unit, for example, for tier one, JTF2?
So I'll give you 2 answers to that. The second answer you won't like, but I'll give you the first answer first. The first answer is when I joined, when I started with JTF2, I was what's called a plank holder. It was a term that I didn't know at the time. It was a term that was explained to me not too long ago, but it's a term that people want to get out there. So I'll do my part and say I was a plank holder, meaning that I was there at the inception of JTF2. So before JTF2 existed, I was training to be part of JTF2 as the early or the first members of. And so we took over that responsibility from the RCMP CERT, Special Emergency Response Team. So the military took it over from the
Mhm.
RCMP in 1992.
Right. Interesting.
And so how many members in JTF2 at that time? I will say this. I can't give you the full number, but I will say that we could all fit in one very small room.
Oh, wow.
So that's how many there were of us. Now, how many are there today? Here's the second answer, the one that you won't like. I can't tell you.
But you know.
No, I don't know, to be
Oh,
honest.
that's funny.
And I even if I did, I couldn't tell you.
Oh,
I have a general sense. I would be very close if I spit out the number, but I wouldn't
it's
anyway.
fine. No worries. No. When it comes to JTF2, it's obviously a very elite, secretive organization, a part of the Canadian Forces. When people like myself ask you a question, how do you know, like, I can't say this, but like, how do you know how much you can share, but you can't, and then you have to take to the grave? As somebody that is sworn in, I'm guessing, how much do you
Yeah,
take to the grave?
as much as I can. Uh, but your question is a great question, and I've given it thought over the years for sure. And I will say this: when I left the teams, um, there wasn't a template that I could refer to in respect to what do I say to you or to anyone else, to the guy standing on the street corner waiting for the light to change
Mhm.
green. I mean, what do I say to that person as I go across the crosswalk? Nothing. What do I say to you back in the day? Nothing. It's taken me so many years to even crack open a little bit on the subject. And so, if not for the last maybe full year, where I've tried to figure out a way to talk about it a little more openly, I still would be saying almost nothing about JTF2. But over the last year, so many guys have poked me in the chest and say, "Bro, you've got to do a better job of I don't know, shedding a little bit of light or illuminating special operations within Canada enough that people understand that it exists and what an awesome
Mhm.
resource it is and how incredible some of these men and women are and how amazingly complex and difficult some of these tasks are and how much of a shining example they are of Canadians
Yes.
for other Canadians. I'm just trying to figure out a way to communicate that now.
Mhm.
And next week, I'll try to do it a little bit better. And a year from now, I'll try to do it a little bit better. Just trying to put a tiny bit of a word out while still trying to figure out myself how much I can put out there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And every word and every moment that you do, I think there is healing in talking and communicating with everybody around you.
Yes.
Yeah. And people can learn, like you said, we see, from my perspective, I see the commercials, and at the end of it, it'll say Canada or join the forces. And that's all I've seen. Or growing up, in school, we would see in social studies the war, the veterans we'd go to see, and all these other things. But we don't know about today. We don't know about the last 40 years, 30 years. It's one of those unknown things. It's like, oh, I'm in the military. Well, thank you for your service, but I don't know what do you do there, and no one knows what to say. It's a tough place to be. Yeah, but
It is.
bottling it in is harder, I would say.
Correct. Two things that you just raised there. There's two sides of the coin. The one is the military community and veterans as a whole need to find a better way to explain who we are and who we were. And that's not easy to do.
No,
And I don't think many of us have done a very good job of it. I know I certainly haven't, but I'm
but
still trying to figure out a way to communicate that. So the other part of it is, it's on me to do a better job of that, but it's also on you to do a better job of trying to find the right moment and the right question to draw more out of me because hey, I'm I'm pretty mediocre at this. And if you're pretty mediocre at this,
then
between the two of us,
we're just
maybe
gonna,
we
yeah.
got to do better. We
Yeah.
got to figure out a better way to communicate. And just the very fact that you pose the question or that you raise the subject is, quite frankly, one of the first times that anyone has ever posed it, at least as a thought experiment for me, a conceptual notion.
As a tier one JTF2 individual, what are some tasks you guys do?
Hmm.
And with that, how do you tackle fear? Because at the end of the day, whatever title it is, we're still human beings, right?
Correct.
Inside can still shiver and quiver.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. This is a great topic, and one that I can use myself as a good, bad example, as I like to say. Because if I can't use myself as a good, bad example, then why would I point at someone else and use them as the example? I can easily use myself on this one. And I'm asked this question more than you can imagine. So your question is not uncommon. It's just that it's asked in the shadows. It's asked in my DMs, my Instagram DMs, and I give a reply, and I don't pour my heart into it, but I take time to considerately help the other person understand the point I'm trying to make. And it takes time to do that. And every time I do it, it's another 10 or 15-minute conversation in the DMs, and invisibly these things keep occurring.
Yes.
And I've done it countless times. So let me make it live now, or let me record it here, whatever the case is. So fear and tier one. You don't have to be tier one to face fear. And at many points in my military career, I faced loads of fear. But it just so happens that as you head towards tier one, or in tier one, it ramps up more and more, and the moments are more and more intense, and the challenges are more and more intense, and the environment is always dialed up to 11. Everything is maximum effort. The velocity is always, pedal to the metal. And that in itself is a handful, but you can't operate in that environment unless many years prior, you were already facing your fears. You're already facing adversities. And so for me, just one of my fears is heights. And so just yesterday, I had a dude up in my IGDM, and he said, "Hey, bro, just want to hit you up with a question. I want to go to JTF2, but I'm scared of heights. What do you think?" And my first thought was, well, step one, you've got a few things to cover off before you get to JTF2 if you're not in the military yet.
Mm.
The second thing I thought was, you're scared of heights. Cool. Because so am I. I'm terrified of heights. And I explained this, as I do to everyone who says, do you have any fears, and what you do when you have fears, and so on and so forth. I've got about 370 parachute jumps. I've got thousands of fast ropes and rappels, and going down buildings and onto the roofs of buildings and onto this, that, and the other thing, whatever. I've got loads of height work. Every single time, I'm terrified of it. I hate heights, but I get it done. And here's why. First thing that I never, ever forget, never forgot it ever since I first read it, in the classic novel Dune. And it is this quote: "Fear is the mind killer."
Mm-hmm.
That has shaped a large chunk of my life. Fear is the mind killer. So I can't allow the fear to kill my mind. And so with that front and center, then I just have to get on with executing against the task at hand. How do I do that? I'm not going to let the fear overtake me. I've got to offset it by the responsibility to the team around me.
Mm-hmm.
So whether I'm jumping out of a plane by myself or surrounded by my guys, in either circumstance, I still have a higher calling. It's to my larger team around me. Even if I'm standing there by myself, it's still to my team around me. And so in that moment where I'm struck with the fear of that height, I will lean on the fact that my responsibility is to those around me, to support my team, to do my part, to be a team player, to do collectively what needs to be done, not for myself, but for the greater calling. And so sometimes when we find ourselves in that moment where fear is really present, just like podcasting, man,
It's scary.
I don't want to stare into the eye of Sauron. I don't want to be here. I have a little fear for the social medias. Why am I here right now? Collectively, trying to do my part, trying to support the team, trying to do my little role in this huge cog machinery. I'll do it not because I love. I'll do it because I'm trying to do my part, you know.
When we're looking at fear, we have gut instinct and overcoming fear. How do you know what's what? Do I breach the door or do I not?
That's a great question. And so, first things first, I think that, you know, fear is fear. And of course, whether it's a 1 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10, it's still a thing. And so facing fear can be on a scale of intensity that just isn't a casual, well, I was a little scared. You know, either you're a little scared or you're totally freaked out of your mind. So there's an intensity of fear that comes into the conversation. But putting that off to the side for a moment and just talking about the general theme of fear, how do you manage it better? Like anything, how do you get good at dominoes? You play it.
Right?
And then when you get good at dominoes, maybe you decide you want to play a little more three-dimensionally. So you
Right.
take on chess. And how do you learn how to play chess? You play it. And so when you're first starting out, day one of the game, you don't know how to face fear. You don't know how to offset fear. You don't know how to manage fear. You don't know what happens after fear. You don't know what happens a month after you've learned how to deal with fear, but then it comes back again.
Mhm.
You don't know anything. So it takes time. And one of the great things about the military is, and unlike any other industry, the military, at least the path that I proceeded forward on, and my friends as well. I'm not so unique. There's hundreds of people like me, I suppose. Um, what is unique about that path is it is designed to introduce and inoculate you against these kind of issues of fear or adversity, or what do I do in this moment when, because you've already gone through it multiple
Mhm.
times.
Right.
The system, the institution as a whole to create me was required to put me under duress all the time to make me bigger, better, faster, stronger, if you will. And so, when at the back end of my career, when I was facing adversity was like breathing oxygen. It was what I thrived in. In fact, I feel, even as I stand here right now, honestly, I work better in chaos than I do in non-chaos. It brings the best out of me. It makes me step my game up. It makes me lean into it. It makes me embrace it.
Yeah.
I love adversity. I love the chaos. Monotony is my worst enemy. The doom of mediocrity. You know.
Yes. And that's a killer. I mean, for myself as well. Zach, why don't you just hang out and chill by the beach? No, thank you. You gotta keep going. There I can't sit still. And
Yeah, but here's the thing, bro. I'm gonna challenge you on that. Here's a little bit of adversity for you. So I get it.
Mhm.
I get it. But that's exactly what you need to do sometimes, because that is the adversity. Because who wants to go sit at a beach and lay in the dirt and do nothing? Not this guy.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not into it. But when there's something that I'm definitely not into, sometimes I got to go do it.
Interesting. Yeah. What is the difference, Sean, from JTF2 and Pathfinders? So Pathfinders, as you said, you guys will come on first on scene, collect intelligence. When does JTF2 come in play?
Hmm. Well, they're very different roles,
Oh, okay.
but I would suggest this, that within the modern military of today, this is how it may play out. And this is just a loose thought
Yeah.
experiment just to give you a general sense of things. Perhaps Pathfinders might jump in, free fall, land somewhere, determine something, send back something in the way of information to develop a plan so that maybe JTF2 could go in there and do something, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
When you were training, I was watching something about SEAL Team 6, and they say they have to go a week without sleeping. Did you guys have to do those kind of exercises?
Well, I don't, and I don't know where you got that information from, and I don't know if that's true or not.
Uh,
Perhaps it could be. What I will say is, of course, I haven't been through SEAL Team 6 training. I'm familiar with it to some degree, but here's the reality. At that level of specialization within those kind of organizations, it's adverse, it's demanding, it's challenging, and the selection process is extremely arduous.
hmm,
So, like in my selection for tier one, and not only was I on it, but I was also responsible for three selection processes. Not responsible all me, but I was part of the directing staff to run three selection processes. So I'm familiar with the selection process within Canada for tier one at the time. I would say this, that it's hard. It's
okay.
made to be hard, and it will never not be hard.
Hmm.
And whether it's through, of course, you've got to create stress, you've got to create adversity for a variety of reasons. And that can be done through a number of variables, or you can lever things through leverage, create a certain amount of
Hmm.
stressors through food and hydration and sleep and workload, and then start working in some fears and set, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of way to create adversity. So one of those ways would be sleep. Now, as an example, on my Pathfinder course, it was 70 days long, and on average, we would have been getting about 3 hours of sleep per night. And it wouldn't be uncommon to go like 3 days in a row with only maybe 10 minutes sleep. And that might be, kind of standing still with my rifle and kind of looking forward and cat napping for about 2 seconds, and then getting back with it and going again. So, the reality is that you lose a lot of sleep on these courses. And ironically, after the course is done, you also lose a lot of sleep thinking about the course. So,
It's just interesting. Wow. And, once you left, you said, okay, it's time to retire. Was the PTSD prior to, and were you self-aware of that? Or did that creep in later on throughout the years of retirement where you said, oh my God, there's some trauma here? And
mhm.
just on a side note of that, people that see too much or hear too much in life often are the most depressed, I feel. If you could, I read a book called Unfuck Yourself. If you could do
Mm,
that, it'd
mm.
just be great to unsee certain things. Your life would be so different. But would you want to unsee things? Because now you know it.
That's right. I think it's that. So, on that particular point, I think it's that classic case of once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And would you want to unsee it? I don't think so. I think it's part of who you are now, and you find a way to be better for it, not worse for it. I think that's the challenge: is own who you are, but turn it into something awesome rather than into something that sucks. And so, when I left the teams, PTSD wasn't a word. It just didn't exist. I didn't know what PTSD was. No one did. And so I got out in kind of a half a day. So in the morning, I was wearing my full black outfit as a team warrant officer. And later that day, I was signing in as a civilian to teach at the Ontario Police College for about a year as a use of force instructor, shooting and unarmed combat and whatever things. And so that day, that particular day, was a full day of transitioning from tier one to about 1,000,000 miles an hour to teaching. at a police college at about 3 miles an hour. And so over that course of a day, man, I can't even begin to describe it, all of the things that occurred. But what didn't occur in that process was a whole lot of paperwork. There wasn't much. And what definitely didn't occur was me sitting down and thinking, well, now what? Because I just kept on getting right after it. I just kept on pursuing.
Mhm.
And so it would have been many, many years later that I heard the word PTSD for the first time. And then my wife, Doreen, who we celebrated our 20th anniversary in Europe this summer, which was pretty awesome. And my wife would not challenge me with things like, hey, do you know you got PTSD?
Mhm.
She would just like keep me in check in certain ways, and in ways that perhaps I couldn't even see at the time, because I was just doing my thing, and I didn't understand that I was actually struggling with PTSD. I just kept on trying to do my best every day, and pursuing the best version of myself, and pursuing excellence, whatever I thought that looked like at the time. And I did a ton of awesome things, I think, but
Yeah.
always within me, I was like, what? Something feels off. And so eventually,
Like, what was
uh,
going on though, Shaun? Like in your mind, was it flashbacks? Was it something like your energy level would just drop all of a sudden? What was?
all of the usual markers. But I would say this, the greatest, not concern, but the greatest issue, because I wasn't concerned. Because I think if I was concerned, then I would have been doing something about it, but I just wasn't concerned because I was so used to, I guess, working through adversity, or struggling through a struggle and getting results through all of my careers. And so I never really stopped to think about, well, if I just do a little bit of namaste, then things are going to turn around, because that's just not how I thought at the time. And so, my wife would, from time to time, say, perhaps, maybe try yoga, or maybe do this, and I was like, that's not me. And so what the biggest issue I was having was sleep, because I was having nightmares all the time, like every night. And they weren't like, I was either hunted or I was hunting. And so in those nightmares, I'd wake up like, and my sleep was crap. And I'd be so not wiped out, but I'd be a little drained. I wouldn't have full energy, and I just get on with the day. And then the same thing that night, have a terrible sleep, and I'm wearing a ring. I don't know if you can see it. It's an Oura ring, Oura. I've been wearing it for 4 years. It tracks your sleep every night. I can see my deep sleep. I can see my REM sleep. I can see my light sleep. I can see when I wake up. I can see my movement in bed, et cetera, et cetera. A whole pile of variables: my HRV, my temperature, my pulse, my this, that, whatever. And so I could see that my sleep, and my deep sleep and my REM sleep was trash, but I just couldn't get it. I couldn't sort it out, because I was constantly waking up, or just never really kicking off any deeper REM.
Mm.
So I mentioned it to my family doctor, and she said, "What? Nightmares every night for how long? A couple of decades? Let's get that sorted out." And so she started talking to me a little bit, and I started opening up a little bit. And next thing you know, I spoke for her for about 10 hours. And she said, "Hey, I think you got PTSD." I'm like, "What?" And she said, "I'd like you to talk to a psychiatrist here in BC. It's called BC OSI. Their OSI is related to the RCMP and veterans." And so I spoke with a psychiatrist for a number of hours via teleconference, and that psychiatrist said, "Shaun, you got PTSD." And I was like, "What?"
Mhm.
And then as soon as I wrapped my head around that in about zero point 0.5 seconds, I said, "Okay, good. Now I got something to chew on." As soon as it was, again, it's a poor terminology, but as soon as I was given that label, or someone said, you're clinically diagnosed with PTSD. Awesome. That's what it is. Now I can go start learning about it. Now I can wrap my head around it. Now I can figure out how to counter attack it. Now I can figure out how to outflank it. Now I can figure out how to smash it. And so at the time when she told me, I didn't know how to assault PTSD, but I knew that I would start. And that's what I've been doing ever since the psychiatrist formally diagnosed me with PTSD. Now, here's the other part to that. As part of that process, I just started working with Veterans Affairs Canada. I'd never done any paperwork with Veterans Affairs. So for 25 years, I left the military. I was like, peace out, and got on with my civilian careers and just crushed it as best as I could. Never put in any claims for all of the chronic injuries that I've got. Never did a shred of paperwork on anything. And dumb, because I could have been receiving all kinds of help for all of the injuries that I picked up in the military. You know, I've been in a number of things. I've had some injuries, and so all of those were had value. Not only value in the sense of monetary, but value in the sense of treatments that could have helped me out 25 years ago. But further to that, on the PTSD front, I could have been receiving treatment 25 years ago. And let me give you a good example of what I'm talking about. So my family doctor, when she got the confirmatory diagnosis from BCOSI psychiatrist that I had PTSD, my doctor said, have you thought about taking any medication? And I was like, Andrea, I'm not a med guy. I'm not into big pharmaceutical. It's just not me. And when I say I'm not into big pharmaceutical, I'm down with the vaccine. In fact, I just got my 4th vaccination there the other day with my wife. So it's not like I'm anti big pharma. I'm just not into like putting chemicals in my body just because unnecessarily. Maybe let's give that a try. Let's experiment on you, Shaun. That's just not me. So I've always stayed away from them. I've never taken any meds in my life. And so my doctor said, how about this? One of my colleagues has had some good success on a sort of a trial basis with a drug called prazosin, which helps strip out combat nightmares. Would you like to give it a try? I was like, I don't think so. And she said, well, you know, it's as common as aspirin. It's used for high blood pressure mostly, which I don't have. And it might be helpful. Man, it's not that she wore me down, because she's awesome and she didn't wear me down. But I don't know, I just decided, I bit down on my mouthpiece and I said, okay, let's give it a try. And so that night I took prazosin, which again is like almost a non-medicine. It's so benign. It's so like inconsequential on the dosage that I took, just one little tab, bam, no nightmare.
Wow.
And from that night on, ever since, I've taken prazosin, and it's been over a year now, maybe a year and a half. Ever since, I've never had, well, it's not true. I've had 1 or 2 maybe in all that time, which is, come on. It was like a freaking Harry Potter magic wand. Now, here's the thing. How stupid am I? Because I could have been taking that 25 years ago. I could have been getting awesome sleep for 25 years. And so where could I have been today? I mean, I've done my best, and I've got after it. You know, I've gone out and I've crushed it as best as I can, and I've done all right. But if I would have been getting all that sleep for all that time, where would I have been today?
A different person. Yeah.
A different person.
When you look at yourself today, well, from what I see externally, again, it's just one dimension of yourself. You seem at peace. You seem positive. You seem happy. How does that happen? Did you have to work towards it? You've
Oh,
seen some
buddy.
of the darkest things that, I mean, thank you, first of all, for your service, but you have seen the darkest things that we as civilians don't see. I mean, how do you stay happy and jolly and inspiring others like myself to go to BJJ tomorrow? How does that happen?
That's a great question. And
Yeah, thank you.
I think there's a couple of, well, there's more than a couple of things in there
Hmm.
for sure to tease out, but I didn't always do a great job. In fact, I still consider myself as not doing a great job of doing it awesomely. I'm still trying to figure out ways to do it better, not just for me, but for other people. And so I look forward to being even better a year from now. Not in podcasting. I mean, I can't get any worse, so it can only get better. But I look forward to being a better version of myself a year from now. And I mean, that's enticing, no?
100%. Hope.
Right? I mean,
Hope.
yeah, but not just hope. Like, I mean, hope, yes, but not just hope. More than hope. It's more tangible than hope. It's a reality that if I just look back on the last year, just 12 months as an example, and this is I'm not using only myself. I'll use a number of guys that I talk with on the regular, use them as examples as well, having observed them over the last year of a collective effort. Um, I've seen people make some pretty positive shifts in just 12 months, more so than me for sure.
Hmm.
But it's a positive shift that's coming out of not only trying to be better versions of ourselves for ourselves, but be better versions of ourselves for others. And it's this engagement of a collective that is not groupthink, but group minded in the general theme of if we do better, we all do better. And so we're trying to recruit a more positive mindset, a more forward momentum mindset
Hmm.
that is not just benefiting us, but benefiting everyone around us. And I think that um, any improvements that I've made over the last 12 months come from just this. It's a it's the two sides of the coin. Right now, I'm doing my best to have a positive, informative, and maybe inspiring conversation for at least one person out there. But in so
Hmm.
doing, I'm helping myself clarify some of my ideas, add a little bit more conciseness to the message, or a little bit more Occam's razor on really what this is all about. Um, so it's helpful for me as well,
Did you have to work through the anger and the resentment and
for
bitterness of,
sure,
yeah,
for sure. Listen,
like why me kind of a thing? Yeah.
yeah, and I think I think that victim mentality
Yes.
is a natural outcome at some point in life. At least it is for me, and I think it is for most people that I
Mhm.
know. I haven't met too many people who levitate 6 inches above the ground on the daily because they've achieved a saintly level of awesomeness. I
Right.
mean, I don't know anyone like that. Do you? Do you know anyone
I
that
don't.
levitates? Right. So I think we're all fallible. I think that we are all imperfect, and I don't think we run our yearly program perfectly. And so at some point we're going to disappoint others, we're going to disappoint ourselves, and whether you're just starting out on this journey and right now you've got a whole wheelbarrow full of disappointments that you're facing, yeah, you're
Yeah.
going to be angry, you're going to be sad, you're going to be disillusioned, you're going to be lost. Um, but there's a process.
Mhm.
It's called I get it. I was there. We've all been there. Let's get to work.
Yeah.
One thing at a time. Just focus on the thing that you need to improve today and chip away at it each day in a positive fashion, knowing that eventually the wheelbarrow will be a small bucket. And then that small bucket, it'll be a teaspoon. And then before you know it, you'll be on a podcast explaining to people that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's you that's shaping how quickly the light approaches in that tunnel. You want to do it fast or slow, that's completely up to you. But just understand that if you do it fast, the workload is still the same workload. And so if you're really eager to fix it all in about a year, man, you got a lot of work ahead of you, and you got a lot of struggles and maybe some tears. Mm-hmm. The workload is the workload. The wheelbarrow is the wheelbarrow. Now, if you want to spread it out over 2 or 3 years, man, that's not a terrible idea. Ease back the throttle a little bit, chip away at it day by day. Know that you can trim down that wheelbarrow full of problems, much more manageable, and not as doesn't maybe sting as much, but you'll eventually get to where you need to get in 3 years instead of a year, and maybe have a more successful outcome simply because you managed it rather than got overwhelmed by it.
Oftentimes we think all of this that we're doing and trying to strive for light and positivity is so far away. How important was it for you to learn breathing as a technique to help you in stressful situations in your career, and then also in life afterwards?
Box breathing is a great tool, but
what is that exactly, box breathing?
Box breathing. So very loosely, you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and repeat. Breathe, hold, exhale, hold. Now, that 4 seconds could be 2 seconds. It could be 5 seconds. That's not important. It's about dropping into a pattern that you are now controlling and executing on a consistent basis in order to stabilize all of your processes in the moment. That means physiologically, psychologically, and emotionally. You can drop down into a much more grounded and present state. Of course, the breathing helps clear out a lot of cortisol or some of the chemical hormonal soup that you've got going on, etc. But it's really just the point of being present in a moment where it might be stressful for you. But as I've said in the past, I don't think box breathing needs to only be done in adverse conditions. So, you use the example of when you're about to kick a door. Box breathing can help for sure. As you're walking down that hallway to the door quietly, or when you're standing by the door quietly, that can help. But long before that door kick and long before you started walking down that hallway, you had to be working on your box breathing mindset for quite some time. And so box breathing is just a process to snap you into the moment and to deal with some of the physiological issues at hand. But I think it shouldn't just be done in front of a door. It can be done throughout your day. And it doesn't have to be a box. It can just be simply breathe in deeply for 4 seconds and then breathe out for 4 seconds, just a 2-dimensional rather than a box dimensional. It's more about being present in the moment through activation of breathing and being aware that you're breathing, bringing you to the moment. It's weird. It's hippie. It's namaste, but I'm down with it. It works, man. For sure it works. Yeah. And the more you incorporate it into your life, the more it becomes part of your life. And until it's not a part of your life anymore, because it's a subroutine.
It is. Before we get going here, Shaun, one question I got was, well, actually, there's 2 questions. There's actually a few questions. I filtered it out. So one of them is...
Hey, I'm happy to stand here as long as you want. Oh, yeah, for sure, man. Like, if you've got timings, that's cool. But
I'm good. I'm good with time as well. Can you ask Shaun why CSIR and JTF2 are so much more secretive than their American counterparts who will talk openly about the non-sensitive parts of their old jobs, especially years after the fact? Thanks. Excited for this one.
Oh, that's a great question. So whoever asked that, thank you for asking it. So JTF2 and CSOR, of course, JTF2 being tier 1 and CSOR being tier 2. Those are just terminologies that reflect the unique roles of each particular unit. That isn't an indication of CSOR is so much worse than JTF2 because they're 2 and JTF2 is 1. It's not about that in the sense of tiers. So that's just an aside. I think one of the reasons that, and this is just my personal opinion, and it's not an informed opinion, it's my guess, if you will. One of the reasons that Canadian, or myself, Canadian Tier 1 doesn't speak too much about anything that I did in the past, it comes out of, that's just how I was raised in the military. So the moment that I started doing more specialized taskings or courses or training or hanging out with more specialized roles, uh, I was just taught to keep that under wraps or to keep it in a tight black box. And so, as I was taught it in the earliest specialist courses that I took on, it became more and more reinforced as I headed more and more towards the tip of the spear until when I was then in JTF2, it was strongly reinforced amongst us. And here's why: because the things that we were doing on the daily, we were inventing on the daily. Now, let me explain that. Because we had just taken over the national strategic responsibility and we didn't have a plan laid out in front of us as to how we were going to start working on all of the really complex and high speed problems that laid out in front of us. What we had to do was on the daily, wake up, have breakfast together, and then figure out what are we going to do today to figure out the next problem. Or more correctly, who's got an idea of something really creative that has never been tried before in the existence of man? And how are we going to do that by the end of this afternoon? Ideas, go. So our formative years were so fluid and creative, and I would argue kind of intellectual property, that we all knew that we were keeping it under tight wraps. And so that's how I was raised, and that's the kind of the guiding force that I use for the rest of my life. Is there's things that I can talk about and there's things that I will never talk about. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, well, one of them is this is in regards to you applied to be a computer engineer.
That's true.
And what's the story behind that? Obviously, for the listeners, you did not get the job, but you ended up writing a book.
Yeah, so here's what happened. And I'm just going to use if you don't mind me telling a 5-minute story, is that okay?
That's fine for sure.
Okay, because
I have all the time. I've booked off the afternoon, so we're good.
Beauty. I think it's a pretty inspiring story. So I'd left the Ontario Police College where I was teaching as an instructor, and I was living in Ottawa, living in Ottawa, and I had some money in my pocket, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and I just happened to be walking down the sidewalk one day, and as I walked down, I kind of looked down the street just on one of the blocks, and I saw some people standing out front of a door, and I just kind of got it in my head, I wonder what they're doing. And so I sauntered over there, and I looked at the crowd, and then I looked at the door, and I thought, they're from inside. So I opened the door and I walked inside, pressed the button on the elevator, stepped into the elevator, went up a floor, doors open, nothing there. I got up to the third floor and opened up, and I saw a front desk, and I walked up to the front desk and I said, "Hi, how you doing? What do you guys do here?" And she said, "Well, we're a computer school. We teach programming and computer system engineering." And I said, "Cool. How do I learn more about that?" And just through a very short conversation, I said, "I might be interested in that." because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I just wanted a challenge, and I wasn't sure what that challenge was. And so the owner of the school, his name is Ben, he rounded the corner and said, "Hi, can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I'm kind of thinking of joining computer system engineering school. What can you tell me?" And he said, "Step into my office." So I sat down, and he said, "Have you ever done any computing before?" I said, "Just a tiny bit." And definitely no programming or anything like that. And the only tiny bit I'd done was in the military, which was, and by tiny, I mean like you can't see the gap between my fingers tiny. It was so small. So he said, "Okay, I don't know what it is about you, but I I get the sense that you have some potential. So I'm going to give you a challenge. You've got the weekend to learn how to program. Come back on Monday and write a programming test. And if you do well enough, then I'll let you join." I said, "Okay." So I went immediately to the public library, walked straight up to the front desk, said to the ladies there, "I need to learn how to program. How many books can I take out?" So I grabbed a pile of books and went back to my place and studied for 48 hours and wrote the test in the morning. Now, I'm not going to say I did amazingly well, but I knew enough how to program a tiny bit when I wrote the test, only a tiny bit though. And Ben said, "You did well enough that I'll let you join." So I joined a computer system engineering program, and at that time, you had to write a whole bunch of exams, proctored exams. There was 6 of them. They're extremely hard, and the failure rate was extremely difficult. And so I wrote the exams and I passed, and I was going to move on into the industry to, become a computer system engineer and put things together. And so just as I was about to head out,
Yeah.
Ben, the owner of the school, said, "Hey, Shaun, our computer system engineering teacher is going to quit. Would you mind teaching? You've taught before, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I taught in the military." And I did. I taught a lot of things. And one of the great things about the military is it teaches you how to teach really well, and it to a broad spectrum of people. And so I thought, man, if you've got no one else, and I looked over my shoulder and there wasn't anyone else, I said, "Okay, I'll try to help out for a little while until you get an instructor." And so what I took on was a program that I designed myself because there was no curriculum. So every morning I would wake up and deliver the stuff that I'd written the night before in the way of a syllabus or in a timeline and all of my lesson plans. I'd write them all the night before, wake up the next morning, deliver them. And so I was teaching 9 till 5 every day. And I was like, wow, this is a handful. And so at the time, as it was, the school was just started taking on people who were on their last legs for unemployment insurance
Right.
or were refugees coming into the country, and predominantly from Somalia at the time. This was their only kick at the cat. This is their one break. And if they didn't pass my course, then they were off EI, or they were, it wasn't looking
Hmm.
good. So I really poured myself into my class every single day. I gave it maximum
Yeah.
effort. And I took great pride in turning my students into qualified computer system engineers after they'd written their tests. But this is how it goes. I was teaching 9 till 5, and then Ben came up to me and said, "Hey, Shaun, our night instructor just quit. Do you think you could maybe cover the classes for a little bit?" So then I was teaching from 9 till 5, and then from 5 till 6, I'd have my dinner at all my servers in my classroom, and then my night students would be coming in early to get some early teaching from me. My day class students were staying late to get some late teaching from me, and then I teach from 6 till 10, and then I'd go home and start writing my lesson plans. And so I ran from day class, night class for, I don't know, year and a half or
Yeah.
whatever. Then a company out of the US said to me, "Would you write a book?" I was like, "Forget about it." And they
Mhm.
said, "Well, would you become the technical editor?" And I said, over a lot of back and forth and writing a contract. I said, I'll do that. And so they started sending me chapters from the United States, written chapters, or sorry, typed chapters, and they were garbage. And so what I was doing was I was spending more time technically editing than it would have taken me to write the chapter. And I'd come in and my students, I'd be teaching them. And then when I put them on task, I'd look through this stuff from the US and I'd be like, this is horrible. My students would do a better job of writing this stuff.
Yeah.
And so I spent several months kind of technical editing. And then finally I put my hands up and said, I'm either quitting or you're going to send me some better material to technical edit. And they didn't. And a couple of months later, I was like, man, I'm out of here. And I realized at that point when I said I'm out of here that they had me, because I'd already put some sweat equity into it. I'd already invested in writing. And that's it. Once I started that, you either do it right or you do it again. And so I did it again. I scrapped the book and wrote it all from scratch by myself. And so it's about 700 pages long. It's quite technical. It's good. It's good to put you to sleep at night. It's far better than melatonin. And so what was happening was I was teaching from 9 till 5 and then from 6 till 10 and then going home and writing a book until about 2:30 in the morning and then writing my lessons plans for the next morning. And then you can see what happened. And over the course of many, many months, I finally said to myself, well, this is not sustainable. I'm out of here. And after about 3.5 years of teaching, I packed it in just because I had too much operational tempo. Here's the inspirational part, though. I did all that. None of that's inspirational.
Okay.
Here's the inspirational part. My buddy, his name is Marlon.
Okay.
And he had worked with me back in the day on the teams in JTF2. And he'd recently got out. And I bumped into him on the sidewalk of Ottawa. And I said, hey, bro, what are you doing? And he said, a little of this, a little of that, but I'm not happy. And I said, what do you want to do? And he said, I don't know, but I want to do something with my life. I want to take on a challenge. I want to do something more than this. And I said, hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you go sit in the back of my classroom? Don't tell anyone that you're not paying. Don't tell anyone that you're not a student.
Right.
Just sit in the back and see what you think of it. And that's what he did, night after night in my night classes. And then I started saying to him, hey, if you like it, I'll mentor you through it. I'll make you a system engineer, but it's a hard slog, man. And I'll be a taskmaster. But if you've got the parts, it'll turn out well. And that's what he did. He sat in the back of my classroom night after night after night. And I fed him information, ran the tests on him. He did all the heavy lifting. He earned his way without a doubt. But at the end of the day, he became a computer system engineer. And so that's not the impressive part. Here's the impressive part. To this day, he's still crushing it in that line of work. He is arguably one of the highest qualified guys I know within the industry. He's smashing it down in the United States right now, making good money, doing good work. And I think he's proud of what he's doing. I'm certainly proud of him. And that never would have happened if not for me trying hard to adventure into a new career and him not being able to say, bro, I need a little bit of help, and me not being able to say, I gotcha, and him not being able to put his sweat, blood, and tears into it, and him not, and so on and so forth. And so all of that to say that we were a couple of like tier 1 operators, and next thing you know, we're a couple of computer system engineers. I mean, you can go from tip of the spear to ultra nerd, and you're still the same person. He's still an awesome dude. But we managed to find the ability to move from one end of the playing field to the other end of the playing field, if that makes sense.
It does. When you look at your life today, are you tier one in everything you do, or you aim to be tier one in everything you do?
I try to be.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know if that's my nature or nurture or what,
Mhm.
but it is who I am. And it's who I've been for a long time. And I just try to do my best. Now, the important distinction there is on the daily, I try to do my best. Doesn't mean I'm going to have an awesome day. I mean, I stink the place up just as much as the next person, on a semi-regular basis. I don't have home runs every single day, but that's not for lack of trying my best. And sometimes your best just isn't good enough. But over the course of time, your best is always enough. It'll always get you to where you need to go. You just don't always see it in the scale of time that you're eager to embrace, which is on the daily. The daily is doing your best. The results show up on the yearly.
Mm. You love the, what do you post? You post something about space ninjas and AI.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Super cool, by the way.
Yeah. Thanks, man. So
Oh.
here's the deal. Like, I don't consider myself to be an artist at all. I don't really paint. In fact, probably some of the best artwork I've ever put out is back in the military when, as a sniper or as a reconnaissance patrolman or whatever, you would have, you'd take digital images and you do this and you do that, but you would also like hand draw out all of the terrain in front of you to capture kind of um, a two-dimensional image so that you could, at least if all of the digital images failed or if the memory stick got lost or
Mhm.
whatever, at least you would have some means of reference to be able to go back with a little two-dimensional drawing. And so that was my best artwork. I'm not much of an artist, but with this new AI art coming out with the Midjourney AI and DALL-E 2 AI coming out, I've got a couple of cool sons. They're 18 and 17, and they're way hipper than I am, but I try to keep up. And so, they were talking a little bit about this AI art, and I was trying to keep my finger on the pulse of that. And so Midjourney, I thought, I'll just give it a try, and I started dabbling with it, and I used the keywords. It was something along the lines of um, modern ninja in modern space armor futuristic, and it kicked out this art.
Mhm.
And I thought, no, I need variations on that, so I ran a couple of variations and I got this image that I named Space Ninja, and I thought, that's super cool, man. And I made it a wallpaper on my phone. And so once it was a wallpaper on my phone, I'd open my phone and I'd look at it. I'm like, that's Space Ninja, cool. Space Ninja, cool. Wow, look at the Space Ninja. And then Dolly 2 came out about a week or two later. And I thought, Dolly 2, I'll check out this AI art. And I started playing around with it. And I thought, wow, maybe this is cool. I could make some images around Space Ninja. I could combine Midjourney AI and Dolly 2, see what I get with 4 images, and then wrap a story around it. And that should be the inception of me moving closer to the singularity.
Mm.
and so here's what I'm doing now. I'm interacting with Midjourney and Dolly 2. I get them to loosely create some art that is imperfect in my eyes. It doesn't turn out how I want it to turn out because I'm still learning how to use AI art and how to
Yeah.
manipulate the keywords. So none of the art that I've put up is actually kind of perfect for me, but that forces me to then interact or weave my story around the imperfect
Mhm.
art of my imperfect interaction with AI. And in some strange way, at least in my mind, it helps me tighten up my sort of virtual artificial intelligence storyline a little tighter, because I have to put intellectualism into the creativism, into the non-realism of this whole little story that
For the
I'm
outcome and that
for
result.
the outcome. And while I'm doing it, of course, as is my way. I'm trying to be craftier than I capably am. And so I'm trying to weave some underlying themes in there that are maybe 2 levels deep. And then if someone knows me well enough, they'll see it's 6 layers deep. So I'm trying to weave in some things there that if you contemplate deeply enough, the surface story is actually not the story. So I don't know. I'm
I
playing
love
around
it.
with it.
Yeah. Are we gonna
You
make an
know,
NFT soon or what?
I honestly I don't know what I'm gonna do.
The metaverse.
I went for a ride the other day on the single track, and I was listening to some tunes, and they were perfect for me to contemplate what I'm going to do with Space Ninja. Again, there's nothing in it. I've got no vision for it. It's not going to be a book. It's not a movie. It's not even barely an idea. Right now, I'm just doing my best with Space Ninja,
It's so cool.
which
It's
didn't
fun.
exist
Yeah.
a few weeks ago. So why am I doing it? Well,
Yeah.
first of all, it could turn into something or not, but that's not my focus. What it is doing is, I hope soon enough, going to be illustrative of how we can all just engage in a creative process and tell a story about whatever we want, and some friends are going to dig on it, and congratulations, now you're doing awesome stuff.
And hey, you know what? Some friends might say, "Can I get it for my wallpaper as well?" Right?
Some guys have asked me, can you turn it into a book? And
Ah,
listen, whatever it turns into, which will probably be nothing, but whatever it turns into, it's already turned into something,
yeah.
because there's people who've sat up and thought that's cool,
Oh yeah.
and it'll lead to them learning more about it. My son said something, my oldest son Evan said something about 3 or 4 days ago. We were coming back from Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and I was kind of laughing about Space Ninja, and he said, you know what's cool about AI art, this new medium? I said, what's that? He said, it allows non-artistic people like us to
Mhm.
be creative. And it's true. if if not for AI art, I wouldn't be creative in this way, because I don't have the talent. I'm basically a stick figure artist, you know. I just don't have the abilities to produce um, static art that will evoke some emotion, or will take someone visually through 1,000 words before I even write
Express.
a word. And
Mhm.
so I can't express that graphically, but I can thematically create it with artificial intelligence. And then now I can do what I do reasonably well, not great, but I can write. And so through my writing, I can perhaps turn it into something.
That's super cool. Articulate it from writing format into this. Yeah, wow. Yeah, generative code art is really cool. I'm absolutely
Mm,
amazed by it and in awe. So when I saw that, I said, okay, this is really fun. And it just, whatever you're trying to tell us, I was like, wow, where is this? Where am I? So,
yeah, that's right. That's
yeah,
right. And you know, when I was a kid growing up in junior high,
yeah.
I loved reading science fiction, um, and I've read a lot of science fiction throughout my life, and I think that one of the great things about science fiction is, unlike other genres, it's non-limiting. And so, uh, because I think writing is, you have to recruit a creative side. When you're
Yeah.
writing in this timeline, if you're writing about our present time, there are, you've got to remain within a construct of less imaginative background, less imaginative possibilities.
All right.
If you're writing about reality, you've got to keep it fairly real.
Mhm.
But if you're writing within science fiction, you can still talk about relative real time things that are occurring right now on our planet and in our world. But you aren't it's not as restricted. It's not a construct that you have to look and see the boundaries. My boundaries are limitless within the science fiction genre of space ninja. So I chose it because I feel like I can delve into some areas that I want to talk about that I can't talk about if I was using this timeline.
No, that's amazing. Before we get going here, Shaun, one last question
Mm.
that someone had said is, how do you stay focused under pressure? So when you were in JTF2 or as a Pathfinder, you have this mission, but all these other things are happening around you. How are you able to not crack?
That's a great question. So I think very simply,
Yeah.
it's a process. And so that process starts on day one of joining your military career or joining that corporation or joining that path that you are stepping onto on day one.
Mm-hmm.
And then 10 years later, you're better at whatever you stepped into. Whatever the path is that you engage in 10 years later, you're just better. And so for me, my path in the military created me, and it created through a process of adversity and challenge that I could then choose how much I wanted to engage in. And so, as is my way, if it's laid out in front of me as a challenge, then you're going to get my best effort. And if you're doing your best as I did, then eventually it'll take you somewhere. And that somewhere for me was becoming less and less impacted by adversity, or less and less affected by the operational stress. And so it becomes a normalized abnormal. And so when all of the chaos is going on around you, you've edged your way into it year after year after year, that eventually you find yourself standing right in the middle of it, and it just feels normal. And it's not something that you can transport or beam into on day one and be casual about all the chaos around you. It takes years, but eventually the abnormal is just normal. And so even in the moment where you feel like you're managing everything, eventually something will come along, and it will feel like, whoa, now I'm going sideways because I've never faced that, or that's too much, or yikes, what is going on?
Right.
In those moments where you're feeling it, here's the next thing I do. I split my mind in two ways. The first one is I've faced harder, or I've been there, done that, or it can't get much worse than XYZ. So I establish a baseline of, I know this is bad right now, but I've faced worse. So I trust that I'm capable of it. The second thing is my team. Whatever's going on in this moment right now, however chaotic it is, my higher responsibility is to my team, is to the guys around me, is to the people that I am working for, if you will. And so in the craziness, if I can't pull it together for myself, I'll definitely pull it together for my team. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah. No, thank you for that. And in regards to PTSD, there's people today in tier one that will come out, and in 10 years we'll have that same conversation.
I did.
Is there a
25
way
years
to
later.
25 years later, some down days or more down days, or more support and help? I don't know. What can we do for the individuals that sooner or later will be veterans?
Well, I think certainly the first thing is realizing the stigma is just a pile of nonsense. It shouldn't exist. I mean, I'm a confident guy. I do okay, and I'm happy to say that I've got PTSD. happy to say it out loud so that other people can understand that you can still be confident, you still be capable, you can still crush it, and you can still have PTSD. And so, what does that look like for me? Probably different than for others. And what does it look like for others? Probably different than others. It looks different for everyone. But because you've got PTSD doesn't mean that you are now subordinated to a life that you don't want to live. It's your life. You get to do what you want with it, and you get to choose whether to do your best or whether you get to choose mediocrity.
Hmm.
And so, in all moments, every day, every week, every year, you can always do your best. With PTSD, that might look like, man, I'm just going to kick it back and relax today with a cup of coffee, read a book, and enjoy the sunshine. Scratch my dog's ear, and just do a little bit of thinking about how I can help others or how I can help myself, or what am I going to do this afternoon? You know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to go up. I'm going to get some adventure fuel, and I'm going to take my bike and I'm going to ride up on the trails and do a little adventure. It doesn't have to be a big adventure, just a little adventure. And then I'm going to enjoy my adventure fuel, and then I'm going to go home, and then I'm going to, and so on and so forth. And so PTSD, I think, for myself and for other veterans and for anyone who's listening for that matter, there is the societal definition of PTSD and what you should expect to encounter. And then there is the reality of what you do encounter. And I would say don't get the two mixed up.
It's like the
Don't let,
seven signs of grief.
for sure, for sure, don't let the PTSD self-help book define your path forward or who you are in this moment.
Right.
Create your own awesomeness, like own your best, be your best, and see where it takes you. It forget about the self-help book that tells you phase 3 looks like this. You're in charge, man. Do your best. It'll be awesome if you do your best. It's
Well,
just a matter of time.
because you
And
could have,
eventually.
because you could have ended up on the other side of the tracks as well. Substance abuse, alcohol. Um,
100%.
we hear about suicide.
For sure.
There must have been something within you that said, you know what, this sucks, but I can push through it. And like you said, peaks and valleys. Not every day is a happy day, but
You know,
knowing that.
I'll say this, and let me this is a bit of a strong one, but it should give some context to some folks out there in respect to statistics. So I'd said that statistically, the incidence of suicide and mental health and all forms of struggles that people will go through, the commonality of
Right.
struggles, that's what kind of got me up off my arse and standing in front of a microphone and staring into the eye of Sauron. But I do have a history, a long history with the statistic, and that is I had a brother, and he committed suicide as a teenager, and that came about, and I was a teenager as well in high
Hmm.
school, and that came about because of bullying. He was bullied, I was bullied. Some kids down the way used to chase us through the back alleys, throw rocks at us, and etc. And like I look back on those times, and I'm like, I can't even hardly imagine that kid that I was at that time, because that's not me now. I mean, I'm far more competent and capable, and the opposite of
Hmm.
being a victim.
Why were you
Um,
guys getting bullied, by the way?
just because the kids down there's 3 kids, brothers, and they were just. I'll try not to swear because I really try to reduce all swearing in my life, so I won't swear. But they were a handful. They were all kinds of jackasses.
Right.
And so it's not that we were the only ones being bullied, just that they were so close to our house that it was handy from school back to our house that there would be some bullying going on. And they were just jerks, man. And it was nonstop. And back in the back in that time in the late 70s and early 80s, there was no books about bullying. There was no books about any of these things. In fact, nobody talked about anything. My parents' generation, they were so ill-educated in these mental health subjects or what bullying meant. I mean, bullying wasn't even a freaking word other than he got bullied. But that was the extent of it. It was a single word in a sentence and nothing more was
Yeah.
discussed about it. And so, when that happened in my life, of course, that was a significant milestone in respect to mental health and what can be the outcome of mental health struggles caused by either adversity or by an institutional problem or what have you, all of the
Mhm.
various vectors that create mental health struggles. And so um, tying in and I don't have any suicidal ideation myself. I've never thought about it. I've never felt compelled to, but I know guys, I've got friends who
Yeah.
feel that way from time to time, and it's a thing. And so, once I started learning of how difficult it is for some of my friends or from veterans or serving members, I was like, what is even going on, man? If this can't get me off my arse and standing in front of a microphone and kind of covering this subject a little bit, easing my way into it, if you will, then what would? And so it's yet another reason that I'm kind of putting myself out there a little bit more. And I don't use what I just mentioned there. This my brother committing suicide. I don't use that as a platform per se. It's not my it's not an initiative or it's not one of the triggers that I use to. And now I'm going to talk about. I mean, I think this is the second time I've ever briefly mentioned it. Um, it's
Did
just
you ever
something
get
that
over that
I
pain?
don't I don't know if you ever do.
No.
I'm not sure that it's a thing that just disappears.
But it's funny because especially now you're like you've gone through this elite training, you're this guy, and in my head I'd be like, my brother's gone, but it's like those bullies, you're like, come at me now. Like, it's like I
That's
got
right.
jujitsu on me, I've got all these things. It's like, screw you, bullies, for doing that and changing my life.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. It's an interesting
Hmm.
and not interesting in the sense of lightly interesting, but it's
No.
an interesting dichotomy between what I was then and what I am now.
Yeah.
But it's helped illustrate to me the bandwidth of then and now and what people are capable of and what people can become, if that makes sense. And so,
Do you think people are pushed to that limit though? Where it's like, you pushed me to that limit. And
yeah,
sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad, but in terms of growth, oftentimes the worst thing that happens to us is the best thing that ever happened to us.
correct. And that's why I'm a strong proponent of adversity, finding ways to embrace the grind, as the saying goes, but more correctly, the grind can be embracing the grind as a statement that can have a person get lost in just
Right.
work,
Yeah.
just nose to the grindstone, just daily grind and look at me grind, look at me go. I'm grinding. I feel so self-fulfilled because I'm grinding.
The hustle.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm winning because I'm hustling. I disagree. I think the more important success is um, not the grind, but it's the adversity. Because sometimes you can't just grind your way out of an adversity in a day. Sometimes the adversity is such that you're not sure how to grind out of it or if you can ever grind out of it. Adversity is stuff that is more than just 100 burpees.
Right.
And so, I'm a proponent or a fan, or I ask people to seek adversity on the daily in their lives, and it can be choosing adversity for that day, or it can be choosing that adversity for 10 years. And I've spoken about it a tiny bit, but in my life, I try to run 10-year projects, which inevitably turn into, 25-year projects, because I don't stop them at year 10. I just keep going. That was mountain biking. 25 years ago, I started a 10-year
Wow.
project. So,
And is that a
I
daily
think
thing for you, by the way, mountain biking?
I try to.
Yeah.
I'm usually riding 6 days a week.
Good for you.
Yeah, and in fact, it's kind of nice. I had a wipeout yesterday. I threw a video up of
Yeah,
it on my
I see
IG.
it.
And I hit
Isn't
pretty
it
hard on my.
here?
No, it's actually my knee got kind of smashed
Oh,
up. I'm wearing my Brazilian Jiu Jitsu knee brace right now. Because I cronked my knee up. But the good news is, because I hurt my knee, now I get to take a day off. So I get a recovery day. So that's pretty awesome.
and see,
If
that's
not for,
part of the grind.
that's right. If not for the injury, then I'd be like,
Hmm.
I think it was
Yeah.
damn near 2 weeks that I hadn't taken a day off. So,
Oh, good for
yeah,
you. Do you take different courses and different paths, or do you
I,
just?
I do. I have now, not to get too freaky, but I started a 10-year project. It's called Mountain Biking 25 Years. I'm still
Yeah.
doing that project, but I also have projects within projects within projects. And so one of my mini projects is, or several mini projects is, one of the projects up on a particular trail is I ride it all year, every year, so that I can observe how the trail changes through the seasons. And I've been doing that for years now. Another one is I have a trail up there where, as I ride it, I have to stop at a certain point called Tree of Suffering, where about 4 years ago, there was just a little tiny stump sticking out of the snow. I thought, that'd be a good spot to do push-ups on. And so I did a set of push-ups because I was freezing cold. It was the middle of winter. And my next ride, the next day I rode past and I thought, that was kind of handy. I'll do some push-ups off of that. So I did some Tree of Suffering. That was 4 years ago. Every time I ride past that tree, I've got to do push-ups because I started the Tree of Suffering project. And so you can call it, I'm going to ride a mountain bike for 10 years, or you can call it, I'm going to ride a trail for 10 years, or you can call it, I'm going to do push-ups off a tree on a trail that I'm going to ride for 10 years, or you can call it, you can dive as deep as you want in a project and create a sub project or a sub project. The trick is choosing something and getting after it,
That's the thing.
committing to it. Yeah, and not just like once, twice, 10 times. Bro, set a 10-year project. Find something that you like.
Like,
And if you haven't found that yet, start looking.
yeah.
And if you stop looking, why did you stop? Start again
So
until you find the
jujitsu.
thing. Jiu-jitsu.
How many years now for you?
For me, 7
7
years.
years. So for you, you said I'm going to commit myself to this stuff.
10 years. I think I might have said it to my wife, but it was just before my 52nd birthday, and I said, you know what, I think I'm going to go start jujitsu tonight. I think I'll start a project, and I just jumped in the car and drove down. And listen, I knew how to scrap. Man, oh man. I stepped onto the mats and these guys, they knew jujitsu. They're good. And one of the things about jujitsu is if you know how to scrap, that's cool. But if you don't know how to jujitsu, then you don't know how to scrap.
Oh,
These guys
yeah.
put an ass whooping on me for 15 minutes. I did 3 times 5-minute rounds, and I didn't know the deal. They didn't explain anything to me. I didn't know how it all worked. And this guy came at me and I just thought, okay, game on. And I started to, getting after it. And I got some skills, but I didn't have the jujitsu skills. So I did all right, but I didn't do as well as I thought I would because the jujitsu. But at the end of that 15 minutes, man, my eyes had been open. I got back in my car. I drove home. I walked in the door. I got I don't know, 20 paces in. I laid down on the floor and laid out like a snowflake and didn't move. My family was standing around me, looking at me
Yeah.
down, laying on the ground. I was like, oh man. That's going to leave a mark.
It gets easier though,
And it
right?
did. It gets
Okay.
easier. Now, here's the thing. This is my pro tip for you. Don't be me. In fact, I hand out that conversation all the time. Don't be
Mm,
me. I'm the best example of how not to do it sometimes. So don't be me. Go in. It's not about being humble, which is nice if you can be humble. Just go in and don't think you're going to kick any ass. In fact, be as lazy as you can.
interesting.
Don't try too hard, man.
Flow, don't force.
Bruce Lee, flow
Yeah.
like water. And I didn't. Like I
Mhm.
was resistive, not resistive in the sense of resisting the training or resisting the
Mhm.
learning. I was like, oh no, you didn't. I'm going to stop that. I'm going to shut that grid down. Oh no, you can't do that. Because I thought I could stop it all. But the reality is, if you don't know jujitsu, you don't know how to stop it. And so I did my best, but man, that 15 minutes kicked my arse.
Uh-oh. Okay, I'm still doing it tomorrow. I'm doing it.
Yeah, you will. And here's why, because it's freaking awesome and it will expose you to who you aren't.
Ah, I thought you have said who you are. You aren't.
Well, no, it'll expose you to who you aren't because who you are, you already think you've got that figured out,
Oh, yeah, but we
but that
really
ain't who
don't.
you are.
Nope. Nope. You're right on that.
Because you have an opinion of how it's all going to play out, and you know you've already visualized certain aspects of when you're on the mat, and you kind of think that it's going to play out in a certain way, but it ain't, and
Perception, reality.
that's not how you're going to do.
Mhm.
And by the way, when you get home after the fact, you're not going to think the things that you think you're going to think. It's going to be a whole new deal. It's a whole new game. It's a whole new you. But you can't understand that until you 36 hours from now have gone through it. And so I would say this, man, you're about to unwrap the best Christmas present you ever got. You just don't know it yet. Uh, but you got to use your Christmas present. And if you use it enough, it's the best gift you ever got for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Sean. And if I'm in Roslyn, we'll roll.
Yeah. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, listen, you'll have a blast on the mats and
You were sore
one
though, eh? Like I haven't
you
worked
you
out in a
will
while. Yeah.
you'll be sore.
Okay.
Dude, that's guaranteed. Um here's my advice to you. And this is probably the best
Yeah.
advice you'll get. When you go in, find the instructor, and then every other student you can, without being too enthusiastic,
Hmm?
say this. Hi, my name's Zach. This is my first night. Be easy on me.
Uh, okay.
Seriously. Explain to them that you know nothing because no
Yeah.
one will, you'll get on the mats with someone, they won't know it's your first night.
Hmm.
Just explain, I'm excited to be here, but I know nothing. Go easy on me.
Yeah. I might not even say about Hapkido because it's been a while now, so I might just leave it out of the. Because also in your mind, when you go there thinking, oh yeah, I
Dude.
got this, like
Yeah, yeah.
armbar and take them
Yeah, yeah.
down.
Yeah. And by the way, if you say that, go easy on me, but then at about 30 seconds in, you get a little eager, a little jazz hands, like you're going to go throw down a wicked armbar. Yeah, don't do it.
Yeah.
Just chill out. Your best thing that you can do for yourself is a little bit of defense, zero offense. Keep a smile on your face. Breathe through your nose. Try not to work so hard that you've got to breathe through your mouth,
Hmm.
like control your breathing, play defense, take it easy.
Speaking of breathing, when you're box breathing, are you going exhaling from your mouth or your nose only, or trying to?
Yeah, there's a number of different ways that you can approach that. The way it incorporates various energy systems and what your intention is. But
Right.
I think the reality is this, that if you're at a point where you're considering which one is more effective in the moment, then you're already effective because now you're present,
Mhm.
considering what you should be doing presently.
Super cool. Well, thanks again for your time, Sean. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
That was
Anytime,
good.
of course.
And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing your journey. There's so much for you, and thank you for your service and everything you've done
Of
personally.
course. Hey, and by the way, while we're having a little thank you moment, how about this? Thanks for being as passionate as you are about what you're doing. I mean, from the get-go, you said, "Hey, would you like to be on my podcast?" And I said, "Sure." And you said, "How about next week?" And I said, "Sure." You've done the rest. You did all the heavy lifting, you're getting your video on, you're getting your coding on, you're writing cool things, and like you were engaged. And I didn't know where this conversation was going to go, nor did you, but it wasn't for lack of trying by you leading up to this process. And I dig that, man. You're passionate, you're into it.
Thank you.
It's cool.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you.